Welcome back. In part 1, I was building this MDF display plinth. In part 2, I was prepping it and getting it all filled and sanded and ready for paint. Now, part 3, we're going to paint the thing and get it looking absolutely awesome. Let's get to it! Bits and pieces I'm using for this. I've got acrylic primer undercoat again, same stuff as before. It's a bit of an old tin this, so I've sieved it just to make sure there's no bits in it, because you do get bits falling off the edge if you've opened it before. And I'm saying old tin, I just mean it's been opened before. I've got a little mini roller tray with my paint ready in. I've got a little mini roller with a concave roller ready to rock. I've got a synthetic brush. I might not need the brush on this one, but there's certain things that you might need it just to mop up a little bit of excess paint or something like that. And I need a little block of wood I can put it on top of. That'll do. Just a scrap of wood and it can go on there while it dries. So I've also got a bucket of just clean water and a cloth, just to give it a little wipe down before we start. Just not wet, just damp, just to get any last little bits of dust off or anything like that. And all I'm aiming to do here, if you've not already seen my video about painting MDF, it's exactly the same process now. All I'm aiming to do is to get a nice even coat of the primer on. I'm not aiming to get good coverage at this stage, I just want a nice even coat, so let's go for it. Hey, I sieved the paint as well. What I like to do with this paint is put it on nice and even, just leave it for like 30 seconds or so, and then lay it off. I find that's the best way of getting a nice finish with it. Now, I do have to bear in mind that at some point I'm not going to be able to pick this up anymore, so that's kind of me reasoning for getting that block of wood. Not too much paint, we don't want any runs or tram lines, but these rollers are great for not leaving tram lines on the paint. Again, if you do see the odd speck of dust in it, if you try and get it out now, it saves sanding it out later. The main thing to watch at this stage is that you're not getting a build-up of paint on the corners. That's pretty good. Do the top. Try not to knock it over. Unless you've got a dedicated clean room for painting in, you are going to get specks of dust. It's just inevitable. Just try and pick them out before the paint dries. That didn't take long. Coat number 1. Done. Right, so this plinth has had overnight to dry now. I don't know if you can see, but it's got great finish. It's fine. No major, well, no specks at all in it, to be honest. I can see no bits of dust. Sometimes you do get bits of dust falling on it and stuff while the paint's drying. We'll come back to that. So we're up to the glossing stage now. So this is 2 stages, basically 2 coats of the gloss paint. I'm using a Leyland fast drying gloss. Gives a really nice kind of not high gloss finish, but a nice smooth finish. You use the paint of your choice. The great thing about this is that it dries ultra quick, so I can get second coat on the same day. The undercoat's dried overnight. Generally, you know, it's going to dry within 2 or 3 hours. It needs to be dry enough that you can run over it quickly with a piece of sandpaper, so you don't want to go over it when it's too wet. I'm going to denib it, so just give it a very light sanding down with some fine, well, I'm saying fine. I've got 100 grit sandpaper here. Ideally, I would want maybe 120 or 150. 100 is slightly on the coarse side, but it'll be all right as long as I'm not too heavy with it. But for this stage, you really want something a little bit finer, maybe 120, but I've run out of 120 or 150. And then the next I've got up from that is 200, and that is just a bit too fine for what I'm doing here. Now, a lot of people have come up with some very clever ideas for not getting paint in the rim of your paint pot. The trouble is, it dries so quick, any paint that lands on that edge dries within like a couple of hours, and then it falls back into your paint and you get bits in your paint. And there are various very good tips for putting like a thing across here that you wipe your brush on, you know, use like a ladle or something to get your paint out. But all I can say is, after years and years of doing this, no matter how careful you are, you'll still get bits in your paint, because you're going to get bits that fall off like the side where the paint's dried on the edge. The only good solution I've found is to sieve it, and it only takes 30 seconds to sieve the paint before using it, honestly. And this is a relatively new pot of paint. This is only a week or so old, this pot, but it only needs to be, the pot only needs to be closed once for this sort of kind of rubbish to build up. If you're going to go round with a brush on the bottom, make sure your brush is clean before doing that. You don't want to take bits from here and then introduce it back into the paint, but my brush is clean now. Just clean the bottom of this sieve off. So we've got the gloss ready to rock, roller's ready to rock, no bits of dust in the roller. Quickly prime the roller a little bit. And by the way, let me just show you, let me just dispel a little myth here. Don't get us wrong, I do generally prefer moisture resistant MDF to normal MDF. I just find it's a little bit easier to work with, but it's not the be all and end all. Let me just prove that to you. This piece is made of MDF, and this piece is made of bog standard MDF. Both from the same manufacturer. That's the standard, that's the MR. And I've got, the edge grain is literally no different. If anything, it feels smoother. Obviously it's going to vary between manufacturers of the MDF, but this is pretty decent quality stuff, this. But as I say, both from the same manufacturer, you get good MR MDF and you get bad MR MDF. You get good standard MDF and you get bad standard MDF. But in terms of the MR versus non-MR MDF, there's very, very little difference. So, you know, I'm not saying don't use MR MDF. Use MR MDF wherever you can, because you're going to run into less problems with like warping and absorbing moisture, especially in like humid environments, bathrooms, kitchens, stuff like that. But for places that are generally going to be dry and the humidity is going to be relatively constant, your non-MR MDF is almost certainly going to be absolutely fine. So, same process as before, really. I'm just going to move my roller out the road while I give this a very, very light sand. But as I say, you don't want to be sanding so heavy that it's going to leave any marks in the paint. Certainly if you go any lower than 100 grit, you run the risk of putting scratches in the paint that are going to show through. Ideally you want to go for like 120, 150. But all I'm going to do is gently, honestly this should take no longer than like a minute. It's just removing any, you know, you get little overhangs of paint and stuff like that. So it's removing any bits like that. Any bits of dust that have landed on the paint and stuck in the paint, this will take it off. Give it a feel that there's nothing that you've missed. Perfect. And then quick go over with a damp cloth. And by the way, since we're using water-based paints, I'm absolutely fine to paint straight onto this while it's damp. If anything, that can sometimes help the flow of the paint a little bit. I'm doing opposite faces just so that I can actually pick the thing up. With this particular paint, when I'm rollering it on, you can get little air bubbles in the paint, but don't panic about that. All you need to do is leave it for about 30 seconds and then come back to it and just lay it off. That means going over it look at how gently I'm holding the roller, and that gets rid of all of the air bubbles. Most of the bubbles pop by themselves anyway, to be honest, but you can force the bubbles to disappear. Watch out for any overrun around your edges. Lay off this side. This would be very, it would take us about 5 minutes to paint this. If that, a couple of minutes, if I wasn't chatting and explaining everything. If you were making like literally hundreds of these, it would be worth maybe sending them off to get sprayed. But if you're making maybe what, less than 50, I would say, less than 100, I think roller's probably the way to go. Otherwise you're going to be spending more time setting up and cleaning up paint and spraying gear. I'm being a total fanny here. Done. Ready for final coat. We'll leave that a couple of hours to dry and then we'll put the final coat of paint on. Coffee. It's late. 7:15 in the evening. I need to crack on and get all these kind of finished. Final stage. This is dried. It's had a good 3 or 4 hours to dry. Probably didn't need that much, to be honest. But, let me switch the heater off, because that noise will do your head in. So, final stage. Really, you want it to be looking pretty much perfect now. And then we're just going to quickly slap a very thin coat on. Before I do, I'm doing a quick kind of visual inspection and check I haven't missed any nail holes. There's no like runs or anything. Another quick sand. Damp cloth again. Quick wipe down. Gloss paint again. Just a thin coat on this coat, doesn't need much. Lay it off. And obviously this is your finished, completely done and dusted final coat, so you're wanting this to be absolutely perfect. So just take your time, don't rush it. Gently, really gently. Look at how gently I'm doing the roller. Just really gently laying it off, removing any marks, just getting that perfect finish on it, really. All I would say is be careful not to overdo it at this stage. This is kind of the point where you can fanny on forever and you can end up ruining it. But I think that's as perfect as it's going to get. The main thing, check your corners, because that's where any paint's going to build up. It's going to be on your corners. So just check all your corners that you haven't got any build up of paint. Lay it off nice and gently. At this stage, if you do spot any bits of dust or anything, I would suggest leaving them until it's dry and just pick it off, because you run the risk of ruining your final coat. That is as perfect as you're going to get. One MDF display plinth. A big thank you once again to everyone who supports us on Patreon as well. You are absolutely amazing. If you don't want to do the Patreon thing, just use my affiliate links and stuff in the description, or you can go onto my website, go onto the products you use section, and you can, if you buy stuff from there, it doesn't cost you a penny, but Amazon will chuck a couple of pennies my way to help keep the channel going and whatnot. I hope you've enjoyed this. Plinths, there's a good reason why you can spend up to, well beyond, you can spend at least £100 each on these sort of things. And there's a good reason to make them well, with a good finish on them. Takes quite a long time. It's not the hardest job in the world, you just have to have a bit of patience. You know, you just have to follow a few fairly basic steps when you're building them. Plenty of patience, don't rush it. Thank you once again for watching, you beautiful, beautiful people. I shall see you next time.